Hello, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, welcome. I am here. I am David Dawei. I'm with Dan O. Dan No. And because Dan never says no. But anyways,
That's what gets me into trouble frequently.
yeah. But anyways, with the way the world has been going on, I've been thinking about this book a lot. It's a book I read 30 years ago. And I don't remember the details, but I remember some of the things. And I've been meaning to crack it out and read it. Now, I'm going to do something a little unorthodox. I'm actually going to go directly to chapter 6 of the book because the first half of the book talks about actual physical warfare training methods. And if I have time, I'll get into that another time. But, I've known Dan a long time, and Dan is a true warrior. He has Spartan blood in him, and both of us have trained actively. Dan is a black belt in karate.
American Kempo, yeah, brought over by Ed Parker. Yep.
Okay, and you do not want to mess with Dan, ladies and gentlemen. You will end up getting hurt, but you'd never know it. No,
Stop.
no, no. You'd never know it because the true professionals aren't these meatheads who go around saying, "Look how tough I am." The true professionals will step up when they have to, but you'd never know it. Never know it. That's why you never ever want to mess with anybody on the street because you never know who they are.
Spot on.
And these days you never know what they're packing.
Amen.
So I'm going to get right into this chapter because it's about 16 pages. I'll try to read it as quickly as I can, but because I want to get it done and I want to get comments because basically I think this ties into what is really wrong with our world today in terms of not just honor, but what I've mentioned with you, Dan, is fiduciary responsibility and accountability. All right, so here we go. This is Living the Martial Way by Forrest Morgan, Major USAF,
U.S. Air Force. Yep.
which means the United States. It's a manual for the way a modern warrior should think. And this is chapter 6, The Foundations of Honor. Mine honor is my life. Both grow in one. Take honor from me, and my life is done. Richard H. from Shakespeare. The morning air was cool and damp as the two men eyed each other from across a meadow. The sun had barely risen an hour before, and the dawn mist hadn't yet burned off the glade. Thomas McKay watched his adversary through reddened eyes. Beside him, his second, Richard Carleton, drove a ramrod down the barrel of his pistol, seating the ball snugly against his powder charge. Thomas's cheeks burned again as he remembered the humiliation had been dealt the evening before. Humiliation at the hands of Geoffrey Harrington, who now watched him from across the glade. For a moment, he experienced again the satisfaction he had felt when he slapped the bastard with his gloves. But it was different now. After a sobering, sleepless night, his yearning for revenge had dulled. Thomas now struggled to contain his fear. Ready! Thomas jerked back to the present as Richard called to the men across the meadow. We're ready, came the reply. As the two groups began walking towards each other, the air was electrified. Horses snorted and shifted nervously. There was no other sound but that of the grass rustling beneath their boots. Thomas fought back a wave of nausea. The men came to about 30 paces of each other and stopped. The seconds met in the center and each examined the other's pistol. Satisfied, they returned to their groups. Next, the mediator, a portly, well-dressed man, stepped forward and called out the rules in a loud, officious voice. There was nothing complicated about this game of death. Each man was to stand still in the open and on command fire as the other fired on him. They would take one shot and it would be done. That is, unless neither was seriously wounded nor felt his honor restored. In that case, the seconds would reload the weapons and they would start again. Richard offered Thomas his pistol, and with his back to Geoffrey and his friends, spoke softly. "Don't worry, lad. I saw his face. He's so scared he couldn't hit you if you were standing on his boots. Just aim for the center of his body and squeeze the trigger." Thomas tried to keep his hand from shaking as he reached for the gun. Richard winked it reassuringly and walked away. Thomas saw now that all the officials, friends, and witnesses had moved safely clear of the rivals, and a fresh wave of fear washed over him. "Gentlemen," said the mediator, "this is the last chance either of you have to settle this dispute without violence. Can't we come to some amiable solution?" Thomas felt the gawkers begin to fidget, afraid of being cheated out of the promised spectacle of bloodshed. The mediator turned to Geoffrey. "Mr. Harrington?" Geoffrey, now pale and perspiring, hesitated. Thomas held his breath and prayed, but Geoffrey finally said, "Let's be on with it." "Mr. McKay." Thomas couldn't force any words from his throat. He felt total despair. With effort, he jutted out his chin and gave one decisive nod. "Very well then, gentlemen. Cock your pistols." Thomas struggled with the iron hammer. It clicked. "Raise and aim." He raised his pistol and tried desperately to steady the barrel, pointing at Geoffrey's chest. His gut knotted in terror. "Fire!" A crack echoed off both sides of the meadow. Thomas lost sight of Geoffrey as the gun's retort jerked his arm upward, but before he could pull it down, he felt the vicious kick. His body spun and his face plunged into the wet grass. Instinctively, he doubled up and grasped his knee. Someone cried out. Maybe it was Geoffrey. No, it was him. Pain raged up his leg. Soon there were feet all around him. Hands were on him, trying to straighten his leg. He heard someone say something about him losing it. Thomas was in agony. Then a pair of strong hands took his face and turned it upward. He opened his eyes and saw Richard's face close to his. "You did it, lad," Richard said, beaming. "You killed Geoffrey Harrington. You may have lost your leg, but you have your honor." This story is fictitious, but it typifies hundreds of cases that occurred in Europe and America before the 20th century. Also, it illustrates a perception of honor prevalent in that period and still accepted by many people today. Men through the ages have taken dramatic measures to preserve their honor. In this instance, McKay killed Harrington and was himself crippled for life. Despite his injury, this was quite a coup for McKay. Not only did he survive the encounter, but tales of his exploit would be told and retold in his hometown for years. More importantly, he successfully defended his honor. Or did he? Honor is central to warriorship. It's a concept common to all warrior groups, regardless of the cultures in which they formed. Whether you call it Bushido, the code of chivalry, or something different, all fighting men and women aspire to ethical codes guiding the manner in which they practice the profession of arms and how they live their lives. Given the moral nature of these codes, they are compatible with most religions and are often mistaken for doctrines of religious origin. However, warrior code is not based on religion. Warriors aren't honorable because they fear a wrathful God. Warriors are honorable because it's practical requirement of their professional. They are honorable because it's the most powerful way to live. Most of all, warriors are honorable because to be otherwise is cowardly. Honor is essential among professional warriors. When hundreds or thousands of lives are at stake, superiors must know their subordinates are absolutely reliable. They must be able to trust those under their command to report information accurately, no matter how bad the news is. They must have their unfailing loyalty. Leaders must know their warriors will march into battle on command and die if necessary to defend their comrades, their groups, their societies, and their ideals. The non-warrior element society also must rely on the honor of warriors, for warriors can be the most dangerous people in the world. As a group, they are the fittest and the best trained fighters in any society. and they wield most of the weapons, including those most sophisticated and destructive. Warriors without honor quickly become tyrants, as some third world countries demonstrate today. Whether you are a military member or not, personal honor is just as important. Studying the martial arts makes you stronger than your non-warrior peers, and you're much more capable of injuring those around you. Without the moral compass that honor provides, citizen warriors can be dangerous indeed. Only honor separates the warriors from the thugs. This chapter will teach you the foundations of warrior honor. You'll learn to weigh the basic tenets of honor to distinguish between issues of honor and those of face. This chapter won't make you an honorable person. Only you can do that. But once you understand the foundations of honor, you'll easily see the most honorable course of action in any situation. The rest is up to you. Basic tenets of honor. For Bushido, the three qualities of loyalty, right conduct, and bravery are essential. We speak of the loyal warrior, the righteous warrior, and the valiant warrior. And it is he who is endowed with all three of these virtues, who is a warrior of the highest class. That was from Budo Shoshinshu of the 17th century. Honor is a term many people use, but few understand. For most, the word still conjures up scenes of duels or military exploits, but people are hard-pressed to explain exactly what role honor plays in these adventures. In other words, they can usually describe the situations in which someone did or didn't act honorably, but they can't quite say what the person did was or wasn't honorable. Many people equate honor to honesty. If you tell the truth and pay your debts, you're honorable. Others link honor to their reputations. If they are respected in their communities or peer groups, they feel their honor is intact. Mar that image, and they believe their honor has been damaged. Sometimes these folks wear honor on their sleeves as a badge of courage. I am a man of honor. Cross me, and I'll make you pay for it, is a common theme among them. Unfortunately, while some of these issues do relate to honor, others have nothing to do with it at all. Indeed, truth, self-restraint, loyalty, and other virtues are honorable, but practicing one or more of these ideals doesn't necessarily ensure one is a man or woman of honor, at least not in the warrior model. To recognize and practice warrior honor, one must understand it. Warrior honor is founded on three basic tenets: obligation, justice, courage. Obligation. It is forbidden that one should, acting disrespectful of the ways of heaven, attach little importance to the duties of his master and be overly attentive to his own business. That was from the regulations of Iwagama Ryoshun in 1325. Obligation is the root of all warrior honor, and meeting one's obligations is the principal part of what makes a warrior honorable. I'm not talking about financial obligations alone, nor am I referring specifically to obligations to perform duties assigned by one's boss or superiors, although both of these examples certainly apply. I'm talking about all the obligations inherent to human society. As John Donne wrote, "No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a piece of the main. Life is a social contract. We all rely on others, no matter how independent we would like to think we are. And when someone helps us, provides a service, or does us a favor, we acquire a social and moral obligation to repay that person. That is duty. Most people are reasonably mindful about repaying favors, but warriors are particularly circumspect about recognizing and fulfilling their obligations. And among warrior societies, none are more diligent than the Japanese. In Japanese, a word closely associated with honor is Giri. Giri literally translates as right reason. Generally speaking, it means duty, but it really means much more. Giri can best be defined as a moral obligation to fulfill one's duty. Its role in society involves a basic social system of debt and repayment. Giri works like this. Whenever someone does something for you, You assume an obligation to repay him. You carry this obligation as a burden until you relieve yourself of it by repaying the individual in a manner commensurate with what he did for you. The Japanese would say you carry his own. Fulfilling that obligation is Giri. It has different names in different culture, but Giri plays a crucial role in every warrior society. Capable leaders train, support, and look after their subordinates. In return, dutiful followers are obligated to obey, protect, and sacrifice for their superiors. Honorable warriors look out for one another. Each covers his comrade's back, and in return, knows his back is covered if his compatriot is honorable. All are honor bound to defend their lords, chieftains, generals, or nations that provide them shelter, employment, and stability. Giri is the glue that binds warrior societies together, but obligation without justice is hollow and meaningless. In fact, without justice, Giri can be twisted into something ugly and dishonorable. Justice. Here we discern the most cogent precept in the code of the samurai. Nothing is more loathsome to him than underhand dealings in crooked undertakings. That is from the Bushido, The Soul of Japan, in 1899. Justice lies at the heart of honor, for no obligation fulfilled is honorable if the act of fulfilling it creates an injustice. I could wax philosophical here and ask what justice is or how one recognizes it, but that would belabor this very basic principle and reduce its impact. Justice is simply knowing the difference between right and wrong and doing right. In Budo Shoshinshu, Yuzan defines 3 degrees of doing right. He illustrates his point with a parable about a man who dies during a journey. Before leaving, the dead man had trusted 100 ryo of gold with his neighbor for safekeeping. No one else knew of this transaction, so the neighbor is left with the dilemma of whether or not to act honorably. Of course, taking the money is the dishonorable option, but Yuzan proposes there are varying levels of honor depending on why the friend returns it. The first and most honorable course of action is to return the gold to the dead man's family without ever considering theft. A second alternative would be to covet the money briefly, but then be overtaken with shame and return it. The third possibility is to consider keeping the money, but decide against it for fear of being discovered by family, friends, or servants. All 3 situations result in the same outcome: fulfillment of Giri and remaining honorable. However, each case reflects a different degree of moral conscience, and therefore a different level of honor the individual has attained. Actually, this example illustrates very well the 3 levels of character growth everyone passes through as his sense of honor develops. Early in life, we begin learning the differences between right and wrong by enjoying the positive results of doing right and experiencing the negative consequences of doing wrong. Parents, teachers, and even peers are quick to reward or punish us for our actions based on their sense of justice. We come to weigh our prospective actions against the possible outcomes and choose those in which the results are positive, or at least not so negative as to be unacceptable. As we grow and come to understand the difference between right and wrong, we develop a conscience or sense of shame. This leads us to weigh alternatives and avoid wrong actions, even when they could go undiscovered. We choose to do right even when we see no outward negative consequence of doing wrong. Finally, honor becomes a habit when we find ourselves not even considering wrong alternatives. On the other hand, some people never develop a sense of honor. I won't go into sociological causes, but whatever the reason, they just don't develop a moral conscience. They go through their life constrained only by the negative results they perceive for their actions. If they think they can get away with an evil deed, they do it with no remorse. These people are all the more dangerous if their judgment is faulty and they can't connect the inevitable self-destructive consequences with their heinous deeds. Fortunately for us all, people of this ilk are relatively few. Actually, most of us are neither pillars of virtue nor moral derelicts. We're someplace in between. We struggle through each day, moving from situation to situation, weighing our alternatives, trying to do right. Unfortunately, many problems don't have clear-cut right or wrong solutions. Too often, obligations conflict, and we find ourselves forced to default on one to meet another. The famous Confederate general Robert E. Lee faced the greatest moral dilemma of his life just before the outbreak of the American Civil War. Already recognized as one of the most talented officers in the U.S. Army, the War Department asked him to take command of the U.S. Army of the Potomac. Meanwhile, the Confederate Army wanted him to lead the Army of Virginia. Lee was a man of honor, and he didn't take his duty lightly. As a professional Army officer, he was sworn to defend the United States of America. But as a Virginian, he was obligated to defend his family, friends, and homeland. Now, more than 100 years later, it's easy for us to say Lee made the wrong choice. But it was a gut-wrenching decision for him, and he decided on the basis of honor. No one has ever questioned that. Not today, not in 1865. Robert E. Lee was so respected by friend and foe alike that when he surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox, Virginia, Grant refused to accept his sword. Grant knew he stood before the greatest, most honorable warrior of his day. Although most of us will never have to decide which side to fight on during a war, conflicts of obligation are common for warriors. So it's imperative that we hone our sense of justice to guide us through life honorably. In each situation, we must weigh the alternatives on the scales of honor and choose which is most right. Above all, we should avoid becoming obligated to dishonorable people. Obligation without justice can be dangerous and destructive. It's a common plight in the Yakuza, Japan's crime organization, comparable to Sicily's mafia. Like the mafia, the Yakuza controls vice operations, including narcotics, gambling, prostitution, and often use strong-arm tactics and murder to maintain discipline. The Yakuza is centuries old. They enforce an archaic code of conduct patterned after that of the samurai. Members are considered soldiers, and the code is fashioned around a rigid adherence to Giri. Rank and file members are obligated to obey, support, and protect their leaders, who in turn take care of them, much as military leaders look after their troops. All of this sounds fine and honorable until you remember the very purpose of the organization: to raise money through crime. Notice I was careful not to call the Yakuza system a code of honor. There is no justice in crime, and compelling people to incriminate themselves through their own sense of obligation is manipulation at its worst. Therefore, before you step into a situation that may obligate you to someone, consider whether or not that individual is honorable. If he isn't, avoid accepting his help. Otherwise, you may find yourself facing the moral dilemma of being asked to dishonor yourself to meet your debt. Remember, to be honorable, you must always examine your obligations for justice. But simply recognizing your just obligations isn't enough. You must also have the courage to carry them out. Courage. To see what is right and not to do it is to want of courage. Confucius. Courage is the virtue most often associated with warriorship. Both the profession of arms and a calling to the martial way demand it. Courage is an honorable quality. Warriors are justly obligated to risk their lives fighting at their leader's command. But the courage needed to live a life of honor is often different from the daring expected of warriors in battle. Moral courage is the fortitude it takes to do what is right, no matter what the personal cost. While not as dramatic as physical bravery, it's the kind of courage most often called upon in every warrior's life. We all face situations in which we see the right course of action, but taking it puts us in jeopardy. Perhaps when you were a child, you had to own up to having broken your neighbor's window, or maybe you had to face your father after your high school prank ran amiss and damaged someone's property. As adults, we face similar situations, and our personal honor depends on whether we have the courage to face them responsibly. Have you ever had to explain to your boss why your sales quota, production schedule, or some other measure of performance was substandard? Did you face the challenge with truth and valor? How about that car you backed into in the parking lot? Did you find the owner and offer to make restitution? You may feel these issues are insignificant, but how you handle the small conflicts in life say a lot about your sense of honor. Moral courage is a crucial requirement of warrior honor. When things go wrong in war, it's vital that leaders at all levels admit their mistakes and report circumstances to their superiors accurately. Given the correct information, leaders can alter strategies and change plans to salvage the situation, but handed information altered to whitewash incompetence, then more mistakes are made and lives are lost. The Vietnam War provided classic examples of how misinformation within the chains of command results in combat ineffectiveness. There's one more point to consider and understand about courage. Having it doesn't mean you don't feel fear. Fear is a natural human emotion, and honorable people experience it just as much as dishonorable people do. What determines your level of courage is how you handle fear. Warriors face it, get control of themselves, and do what must be done. Cowards run. Honor and face. As you see, honor means recognizing your obligations, then having the courage to do what is right. So where does reputation fit in? And how do you go about defending your honor? To consider these questions, let's look again at the story that opened this chapter. In summary, Thomas McKay and Jeffrey Harrington had a public confrontation in which Harrington did something to embarrass McKay. Publicly humiliated, McKay felt it was his honor was damaged, and the only way he could restore it was by forcing Harrington to apologize or by defeating him in a duel. So according to custom, McKay challenged Harrington and killed him. As was usually the case, neither of these men really wanted to fight. They were compelled by convention and by their peers. Had the confrontation occurred in private, they probably wouldn't have considered risking their lives over it. But since their egos had collided in public, each felt honor-bound to get satisfaction. To withdraw would have implied cowardice and resulted in the perception of dishonor. But was this confrontation really an issue of honor? Well, let's examine it against the basic tenets. We'll start with courage. Dueling as these men did certainly took courage. Standing still only yards from a man shooting at you is a terrifying experience. Both men were scared, and rightfully so, yet both kept their fear under control and did what they felt had to be done. However you feel about them, you can't deny they were courageous. What about justice? Well, McKay believed his response to the humiliation Harrington had dealt him was just. After all, he was defending his honor, wasn't he? I know what you're thinking. How can you determine whether McKay's response served justice when I haven't told you what Harrington did to embarrass him? But does it really matter? Is there anything Harrington could have said or done that would have prevented McKay from meeting a just obligation? Of course not. And since nothing Harrington could have done would have diminished McKay's honor, how could there have been any justice in McKay's killing him or putting his own life at risk? Regardless of what offense Harrington committed, neither man had justification for fighting to the death. Finally, there's the question of obligation. As you recall, it's the very root of honor. So what obligation did McKay have to fight? If you asked him, he'd probably tell you he was obligated to defend his reputation, his family's name. No doubt, killing Harrington as he did enhanced his reputation in the community, given the social conventions of the day. But since his honor really wasn't at stake, the case for an obligation to kill is pretty weak. You see, like most duels over honor, this really wasn't an issue of honor at all. It was an issue of face. Fighting for honor was once a fairly common theme in many cultures, and it still is in some. But once examined, fights for honor almost always turn out to be fights to save face. Face refers to one's reputation in the community or circle in which the individual must live or work. It is, in essence, prestige. In some cultures, face is very important. Citizens of certain Asian countries place great value in face when measuring a man's worth. Likewise, Middle Easterners and Latins consider face crucially important. Face is even more important in most warrior societies. Men and women of power tend to have great egos, and where ego is involved, pride in one's reputation is an inevitable byproduct. Face is closely tied to ego and often results in senseless fighting. Even so, face isn't necessarily bad, nor is it always wrong to fight for it. Leaders at all levels must command face. The moment a warrior loses the respect of his troops, effective command becomes impossible. Teachers must have face with students, parents with children, and police officers in the local community. In fact, all people in authority must have face with their subordinates to exert their leadership effectively. With that in mind, you should always consider the role face plays in any conflict. When you find yourself in confrontation, there is usually more than one road to resolution. Of course, your goal is to get your own way. You want to end the conflict as quickly as possible, getting the results you want. But too often, feeling the sting of being challenged, you decide you want more than you originally set out for. You decide you want to teach your opponent a lesson. In essence, you want to take some face. That is a very dangerous move if you're confronting a warrior. True warriors value honor above all. Nonetheless, they are still among the most dangerous people in society, and they'll usually defend their face fiercely. If you want to end the conflict without escalation, it's usually wise to protect your opponent's face. I'm not telling you to back down or sacrifice your own face. Get your way, but find some small compromise that will save face for your opponent. Perhaps you can admit some small error on your part. Maybe he'll want to claim he misunderstood the issue early on, even though you didn't know he didn't. Give him ground. Unless you want to fight and know you can win, let him have his face. After all, one day you may need this warrior as an ally. Yes, face is an important facet of warriorship, and no doubt you'll fight for it from time to time. Perhaps you'll be justified, but even if you are, don't think you are defending your honor. You're not. Face can be taken from you, so it's something you can fight to keep. On the other hand, honor depends solely on your commitment to meet your just obligations. Since only you can do that, no one can take your honor from you. You can have all the face in the world and still lose your honor. Conversely, you can remain honorable no matter what the world thinks of you. Forced to choose between these two conditions, the superior warrior will pick the latter. Develop your own sense of honor. With the basic tenets in hand, you understand the way of honor can separate issues of honor from those of face. But just understanding what honor is all about isn't enough. You must learn to apply the way in your life. Don't be discouraged if you've been dishonorable in the past. We all have. No living warrior is a saint. We've all failed in our obligations or turned our faces from justice at one time or another. But the past is behind us. It's a memory. It no longer exists. All we can do now is live as honorably as we can today. Each of us must cultivate and nurture our own sense of honor. We must practice the principles of obligation, justice, and courage until they become second nature. To develop your own sense of honor, consciously examine each of your social interactions and how the tenets of honor pertain. Use this three-step process to make your honor a way of your life. Number one, determine your obligation. Every time you interact with someone, take a moment to examine the situation for obligation. Is that person doing something for you? If so, are you repaying for his service in some way? Perhaps he's your friend and doesn't expect anything from you in return. Well, that doesn't relieve you of the Giri to return his kindness. You carry his own. The fact that he expects nothing in return binds you all the more. Number two, weigh the situation for justice. Look for the right and wrong in every situation. Whenever you feel you've obligated yourself to someone, examine the circumstance for justice. What is the right thing to do? Usually you'll see the right action is to fill Giri and pay your debt. However, blind obligation is self-destructive. Watch how your associates conduct their affairs and avoid obligating yourself to dishonorable people. If you always watch people with an eye for justice, you'll usually know who the dishonorable ones are. Treat them courteously and deal with them as your duties demand, but keep them at arm's length and never turn your back. Most of all, never accept anything from them that would bind you. Carrying the own of a dishonorable man is a dangerous burden. You can almost always see the right and wrong in any situation, but sometimes just obligations conflict. All too often, warriors end up carrying more obligations than they can meet. Worse yet, they find themselves, as General Lee did, obligated to conflicting causes. Obligations to your job may interfere with commitments to your family. Obligations to your employer may conflict with obligations to your community or society at large. In these cases, it's especially important to step back and weigh the situation for justice. What is the right thing to do? In any case, don't whine and don't procrastinate. Like Lee, choose the most just course of action and do it without looking back. That takes courage. Number 3, take courage and act. The final step in developing honor is the easiest to explain, but the hardest to apply. Too often, people see where their obligation lies and know the right way to do, but they are afraid to do it. That is not the warrior's way. Warriorship is a profession of courage, a calling to valor, not just on the battlefield, but in all of life's conflicts. So steel your nerve and march forward. Far better to fail in an honorable endeavor than to succeed in a cowardly one. That is the way of honor. That is the way of the warrior. Points to remember: the foundations of honor. Honor is central to warriorship. It's common to all warrior groups, regardless of their cultures in which they formed. Although its moral values are compatible with most religions, codes of warrior honor sprang from necessity, not from any religious doctrine. Truth, self-restraint, loyalty, and other virtues are honorable, but practicing one or more of these ideals doesn't necessarily ensure one is a man of honor, at least not in the warrior model. Honor is founded on 3 basic tenets: obligation, justice, and courage. Obligation is the root of all warrior honor, and meeting one's obligations is the principal part of what makes a warrior honorable. Obligation is best explained in the Japanese concept of Giri, or right reason. When someone does something for you, you carry that person's own or burden. Relieving yourself of that burden through repayment is Giri. Justice lies at the heart of honor, for no obligation fulfilled is honorable if the act of fulfilling it creates an injustice. Justice is simply knowing the difference between right and wrong and doing right. Courage is the virtue most often associated with the warriorship. Both the profession of arms and a calling to the martial way demand it. Moral courage is the fortitude it takes to do what is right, no matter what the personal cost. While not as dramatic as physical bravery, it's the kind of courage most often called upon in every warrior's life. Once examined, fights for honor almost always turn out to be fights to save face. Face refers to one's reputation in the community or circle in which the individual must live or work. It is important in all warrior societies. You may fight for face, and maybe you'll be justified. But even if you are, don't think you are defending your honor. You're not. To develop your own sense of honor, consciously examine your social interactions for how the tenets of honor pertain. In each, determine your obligation, weigh the situation for justice, then take courage and act. That's the end of chapter 6 of Living the Martial Way, a manual for the way a modern warrior should think. Okay, Dano, your mic's off. What do you think?
Yeah, well, what can I say? I mean, it's hard to, I suppose, disagree and refute any of that. I mean, in the ideal state, myself included, I could do all that perfectly and I'd be a much better human being, right? I know in general, though, some of us are a little more mindful and vigilant of that sort of thing. I think than others. It doesn't necessarily make us better per se, but we're mindful and we try to act accordingly. I wish a lot of our leaders were more in that same vein. Our current day and modern day leaders, I don't think they are. So, I mean, these are the things that run through my mind, you know, just on a societal basis as well. You know, your word's important, simple things like that, what you say. We've all failed at times, but generally speaking, your word is your bond, right? And to me, honor goes along with that, right? I mean, respect for yourself and respect for others, right? You just don't throw stuff out there in a flim flam type manner. Oh yeah, sure, no problem, and with no intent whatsoever of ever, fulfilling whatever obligation or fiduciary obligation, particularly if you're in a leadership role, right? I mean, that's what runs through my mind. This stuff's important,
Well, it comes down to the foundation. It's kind of what he said is warriors are able to perform their job because they know somebody has their back, right? And
That's part of it. Absolutely.
And that's what makes it's what he said is when he said that we're part of a society, we're part of a group. Because what happens is when you can't trust this one piece, then this piece falls apart, and then this one can't be trusted, and then it becomes just falls apart.
Yeah. Yeah. The foundation, the ultimate fabric of it all starts to unwind, right? And look, we've talked about it 100 times. I mean, when we see it in our society, right at the family level, up through the leadership level, and probably back down again.
Yeah. And what did he say about how you treat dishonorable people?
Keep them at arm's length.
Yeah. Keep them
for sure. Yeah. I mean,
don't bring them into your circle.
Arm's length. Yep. Don't bring them into your circle, and you can't trust them. You can't trust them, period. Sometimes it's that clear cut, folks. And we're at a point now in this country, where those types of decisions are going to have to be made more and more. Eventually, you're going to have to make a clear cut decision. And the waffling and the grayness and this and that, there'll be less and less margin or room for that, if you will.
Yeah, and it's not specifically mentioned in this chapter, but it is in later chapters. And the term Giri or Giri, however you want to pronounce it, okay, that is basically an obligation, right? Okay, that basically is it's not a blind obligation, okay? And what this says is there's twofold. Following orders is not an acceptable answer for fulfilling an obligation, okay? You have
no argument for me.
That's number one. And number two, it's actually your obligation to break the bond or if somebody, let me rephrase that. If you have an oath to somebody because of their oath to you, that is a reciprocal. Everything is a reciprocal relationship. And when one group breaks it or is dishonorable, you can't continue following dishonorable people.
Couldn't agree more. Once it's violated, especially the trust as well, the obligation, the truthfulness, on and on and on to do that.
We're going to have to throw them out.
I don't see it.
I mean, I don't know. We're going to have to find a way to throw them out, or we're just going to have to go to Mexico.
Habla español.
Yeah. Okay. Buenos noches.
Buenos noches, amigo.
Gracias, amigo. Peace.
Buenas noches.